Well, I'm very excited to get started with the next section of our afternoon panels on the social currency of content. This is an incredible panel, and Jill Schlesinger will be moderating. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jill and the panel for this afternoon. Thanks.
So let me just start by going down the line, and everyone just do a quick snippet, kind of you see who they are and where they are, but just a quick 1 minute, where you came from, resume, start. Name?
Could you have told me that before?
Why? Come on, it's in your head.
I obviously work for UBS. It's a pleasure to be here. I spent 5 years with Intel in Silicon Valley and 14 years with McDonald's prior to that. And prior to that, I was running a chocolate brand, Purple Cow, Milka. And way back last century, TV was almost still black and white. I work for a consultant, so that's where I come from.
Okay, Lisa.
I'm at Travelers, and prior to that spent almost 12 years at Citigroup in a wide range of different roles. Started the women's business there, Women & Co. Ran that for 10 years. Managed all the crises in terms of communications and marketing through the financial crisis for Citi. Paul Butcher was on my team, hired him.
Wow.
This is great, actually.
I feel like she's going to torture him a little bit.
It is great. He's a class act. And prior to that was at Disney. Before that, in a marketing communications role. Before that at CBS, and prior to that spent over a decade in the political arena in the White House as Hillary Clinton's communications director, and then also on the Hill in the House and the Senate.
So if she runs and she wins, then we're going to lose you again, right?
This is a panel about LinkedIn.
I thought I'd get a little something there. Got to make news, baby. Okay, Paul.
Well, I've been with Citi for close to 5 years, and actually joined at the height of the financial crisis that Lisa mentioned. And I think when I went in to see Lisa for, I think my final interview, the share price dipped below $1.
Oh,
and I think you said to me, well, why would you want to join Citi right now? So that was it's been an interesting time, but the digital world has evolved a lot in the last 5 years, and it's been a very interesting ride.
So let's start with that. I mean, because you guys have been in marketing roles for a long time, and Johan, you had in different, not just different companies, but different industries. And so what is this impact of social to the marketeer in general? What has happened that has been really so surprising, both maybe on the upside and the downside for these companies?
Well, I think the downside is pretty obvious. As we are in the beginning of the beginning, there's so many things you can do wrong, and you know, we all are human beings, so we're excited about doing a lot of things at the same time. So I think probably the major piece on social that I'm missing is return on investment. Mm-hmm. Being able to really qualify how much is this worth doing something else. On the upside, it's obvious. I mean, you get if you get it right, you get a conversation directly. You can reach out. You looked at LinkedIn, the way you can influence influencers, and the way you can connect to a social graph where there's just a lot more trust built into the system is just stunning. And you know, none of this is new. I mean, you and I talked a little bit about this, right? The fundamental 5 or 6 ways that human beings have always sort of connected to each other, whether that's, you know, displaying an art, or you know, it goes all the way back to being in caves and painting on the walls, or you know, you think about the commercial aspect of connecting with human beings. We've done that for a couple of million years, right? So there's really nothing of this that is fundamentally new in the way we connect with people. What's really new about it is the speed and the flexibility, and I think that's what we're looking at, and what I look at specifically is how do you get an attitude into an organization where perfect was always sort of the end goal of what you do. And so how do you get done is better than perfect in terms of a mindset? And how do you get to a flexibility built into a system or a static? And I think those are the two things that that are interesting.
Lisa, considering that you go back in time, that your messaging, probably when you started at Citi, was one way, right? You push messaging out. So how does the idea of having this two-way communication stream, what does that mean for you in your role, and how you use content to augment that conversation?
So let me go back to Citi, because I think it's a really important question, and how the digital paradigm really changes your dynamics, particularly when you're a company in crisis. And at the time, Paul and I were dealing with a situation where Citi had just an incredible global brand at the time, enormous amount of equity in the brand. And I believe that equity in large measure was a great factor in helping to carry it through the financial crisis, and it didn't suffer overseas. It obviously suffered domestically because in many respects, at different moments in time, it became the face and the piñata of the financial crisis until it moved to another financial institution and then another financial institution like that, after that. So I think in a crisis, when you lose consumer confidence and people are hit hard, like they were in the financial crisis, personally, professionally, and their wallets were hurting, and they couldn't buy a home, they couldn't get a mortgage, and they look at an institution like Citi and say to themselves, they're to blame for this. You have to ignite a two-way conversation. I remember having a conversation with our CEO at the time, just a magnificent man, Vikram Pandit, just superb. And we talked about the importance of the two-way dialogue with the consumer, with businesses, with customers, in order to show that Citi was changing as we were coming out of the financial crisis, to show the authenticity, to show the transparency that we were actually going to change the way we were doing business. And a concept was born called responsible finance, and we created a whole campaign that was launched digitally. Not an ad campaign, but it was launched digitally by putting the faces of many of our employees front and center in the dialogue, and we got the incoming and had to deal with that. Going forward now to travelers, we sit with an immense amount of content right under our roof. We're risk management is our expertise, and so whether it's safety tips on how to prevent ice damming during the polar vortex, or the kinds of things businesses should do in terms of making sure they have business continuity plans, that's immense content that's ripe for social channels and having that two-way dialogue. Now, I think as Johan appropriately points out, how do you measure reach, frequency, engagement, all really important things for your brand. Lead generation, critical.
Yeah.
So then how do you take the leads in those social channels and turn them into a transaction? And I think that's the holy grail. And I think we all are all grappling with that as marketers and the KPIs we put around it. But content is king is my mantra inside our company. And I talk about us being social publishers, brand journalists, and pushing what I believe is a competitive differentiator in the way of content.
And Paul, I know that Citi's putting out a lot of content. I'm wondering, how much of it is planned? How much happens in real time? An event occurs or something's going on in the marketplace. How do you want to be proactive, reactive, and how are you dealing with that?
Well, I think a large part of the content that we put out is planned. Some of it is in response to situations, but we're clearly never going to attempt to be or want to be a news service or a financial news organization. That's not what we do. That's not what we want to be known as. So I think the responsive content that we are focused on is where we want to have our opinion or our voice on a particular matter out there. If there is something in the news that has been misstated about something related to our business, and we feel that putting out the facts so that they can be read in conjunction with the news story, that's That's the type of responsive content that we're putting out on the corporate side.
And Johan, how we're 5 years from the financial crisis. Everyone still hates financial services companies. So how is social being used to win back the trust of those people who are out there who really do feel like, wow, those guys got off, and I am hosed and have less equity in my house?
I think there's two things. Lisa said it, right? Content is king, context is queen. And I think it's in that combination where social really plays a key role. I think that there's one term that social in general and digital in more specific probably hasn't lived up to yet. So that's relevance. There's so much going on. There's so much you get bombarded with, and not all of it is very relevant. And I think we have to figure out how you get a system in place that allows you to have that organizational learning of how do you place content at the right time, in the right context, in the situation, in the right moment. It's very different if you look at what people are doing in the morning with a PC, a tablet, or a phone on the way to their work, and what they do being a couch potato, or whatever we called them earlier this morning. And in both of these situations, the same piece of content will either be successful or not. Understanding that relevance is, I think, is key. And then to your point on probably reputation of the banking industry, it's very simple, right? I mean, it's like personal relationships. You have to earn back the credit, and you only do that by building trust. And brand trust happens when you're able to predict a future interaction with a brand based upon prior interaction, and those two connect. That's when you start building trust again. So it's a matter of time, it's a matter of integrity, and it's a matter of don't say what you're going to do, show me how you do it, and I'll work through it. So
if you think about 5 years later, have you regained the trust yet? Do you feel like at least do you feel like not just financial services, but UBS has regained trust?
Well, it depends on the territory, obviously. I think also it's not 5 years ago, right? It is still ongoing. I mean, you can talk to a lot of people, and they are still feeling hurt. I don't think that the day of everything breaking down, if you want to, is sort of what people keep in mind. The economy is obviously still not where it should be. 15 million people in the United States are looking for work. We are still probably in some sort of a flight of an economic crisis. And it will change the way people are seeing financial institutions.
So Lisa, if you have your thought leaders out there, I'm wondering, how do you make this balance where you really want there to be personality attached to this human being and make your brand human, and make that authentic without kind of oversharing? What is it that you do to strike that balance?
Well, I'm proud to say our CEO, Jay Fishman, is a LinkedIn influencer and launched his first post recently, and we've just had great response to that. I think that when you have a very thoughtful, substantive, passionate CEO about particular issues, that certainly humanizes a brand and attaches, I think, a social responsibility and thought leadership to it that influences the way people think about a brand and influences their purchasing intent. I think, advocacy for different issues, the way you do your corporate philanthropy and your citizenship and your community relations, they all intersect to help reinforce that brand. And so, using social channels to tie those pieces together, again, certainly appeals to a lot of consumers, particularly millennials, who look for socially responsible brands. So you want to strike that balance of showing, I think, the humanity of a brand, the way a brand has a certain commitment to the communities where it operates, is a very important facet to have that also balances what you may be doing in digital channels, whether it's direct marketing and going right at those levers to get people to transact immediately, it's a balance. It's what I call 360-degree marketing, where you're making it all come together. I think the days of the traditional marketing funnel are gone. You know, there's always the discussion of the top, middle, and bottom of the funnel, and I really see it as a series of concentric circles, and you're going across multi-platforms and, you know, paid, owned, and earned channels. So it's a new paradigm for marketers because of the advent of digital channels.
Paul, you know, we talk about CEOs having voices, either as influencers. How about other people in the organization? How important is that as well, to give different people a turn or give different voices to speak to different people? In other words, you've got a male CEO, but do you want to have a woman out there? Because you guys did the Citi, the women program, and how important is it to have a woman speak to those people? And how do you see that?
Well, I think it's, you know, to Lisa's point, it's critically important that whoever is doing the speaking is credible and knows what they're talking about, and that's the number one. The content that is produced needs to be useful and valuable. So I think people are less concerned now about which channel something is coming through, whether it's coming from a news source or whether it's coming from a company, or it's who is the individual and are they speaking to me, and do they know what they're talking about, and is it valuable information? So we have a lot of contributors from around the company who are thought leaders in various areas, and the content that they produce has been extremely valuable to people within the area that they're focused on. So
how do you identify them? Do they raise their hands, or do you say, we want you?
I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
Some people are very keen to get their names out there and get their content out there, and some people are just natural experts in particular areas. So it's a combination of both.
I was just going to add to what Paul is saying. You know, Citi does have a stable back in the day, right? Mm-hmm. We went about that to have a speakers bureau, which was, I think, a good thing to do. At Travelers, we have these experts who sit in our area, a very robust area called risk control. And what is that? They give that risk expertise, and they're safety consultants. And we put them out on YouTube wearing a Traveler shirt, and they give, their 4 tips. And it's back to what Paul's saying. This is content that's informational and helpful to people, and it's in bite-sized chunks, and people you want to be in the right place at the right time. Back to context is queen. Love that. Can I steal that? I'll quote you.
Yeah.
I love that.
Footnote that.
Because it's really, it's spot on, and it's the relevancy factor at the right time, and packaging it such that people find it useful.
Maybe just a hook to that. I think the negative example is actually the one that is key. If somebody is not a good speaker and doesn't really want to go out there, don't make them a brand ambassador. We all seen that, and you look at any given part of a society, you all know the 1-9-90 kind of flow of 1% will be overpopulating their surroundings with opinion, 9 would do it occasionally, and 90% are just following. And I think it's key to just understand that if you're not good at it, you shouldn't probably be the public face, even if you think you're good at it. Right? Perception is obviously occasionally wrong.
I hate to be the person who tells that person that.
But from being such a thoughtful journalist, you have to have credibility. In other words, you how shall I put this? You can't have a tall hat and no cattle, right? You consumers know.
Can I steal that one?
Yes.
Oh, this is so nice. Everyone, you can steal this. Just
But they know if you're not credible, you can't spin.
Right.
And you better have the substance and know what you're talking about. And if you have a certain degree attached to your name, that doesn't mean a lot unless you've got the depth of the substance.
Johan, if you've got a thought leader out there, are you worried that they're going to stir the pot on an issue? Like, we're in financial services. You could have someone come out and say, make a mistake and say, I don't need regulation, and then maybe something happens and you did need regulation. So how how controversial do you want your thought leaders to be?
I'm from Denmark. We're good at being controversial.
I don't even get that joke, but okay. What does that mean about Denmark?
Well, we pissed off the whole Middle East with one cartoon. So
there you go. Perfect.
I think you have to be giving an organization and its social face guidelines. But nobody is interested in the legal department's opinion. And I think it is key to understand that once you get a public face, that there is a certain amount of personality, character, and opinion that comes with. And as long as that is along the lines of a broader strategic scale of what you want to get out, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of financial institutes, that's a new land.
How do you guys feel about that? Like having a thought leader stir the pot on a controversial issue that, look, it could. I interviewed Lloyd Blankfein last year, and because I thought it was interesting that he did the HRC video for marriage equality, and I said, weren't you worried you were going to piss off some of your clients? And he basically was like, not so much. So how do you feel about that? Like you could actually alienate some of your clients and prospects by taking a stand on something that is controversial. Is it more important to be authentic in that moment, and to be that person, who he really thinks he is, or to put the business first?
Well, I think that's just the question. You have to make the determination. Are you going out there as your own personal brand, or are you going out there as someone representing the company brand? And that's a real distinction. And that's a hard needle to thread, I think. I think, secondly, that those lines tend to blur sometimes, but you always have to do the risk analysis, and certainly that's what we do in our business, and we look at the pros and cons, and then we make the decision, and I think that's just sound business judgment. I do think that it does go to the authenticity, but you have to determine in what position are you representing either the company or the personal brand question.
Right.
But I would say if it goes wrong, you are representing the company.
Right, that's the problem, right? You don't know sometimes till after.
Well, I think you do. I think the naivety of saying, oh, I just said that because it's my personal opinion, well, that might be true, but unfortunately, you also work for a company, and so why would this be different if you give an interview and you have followers that follow you predominantly because of expertise you might have in your job? I think if there's an opinion that is controversial, I actually think it's beneficial for organizations to have those. There's nothing more boring than Disneyland kind of suburbia where everything is neat. And you don't say anything to stir anybody up. I don't think that's a competitive advantage, and particularly not with Millennium, that actually want people with an opinion to be around them. Right. And having lived in Silicon Valley for quite a while, it's the attitude that actually when you work for a company like Intel, and if you are an engineer, you should have an opinion about some of this stuff. And I think you should go for financial services as well.
The financial services companies have a lot of knowledge on most of the issues that we're, that are controversial or are interesting within the financial world. So I think it's any company that is looking to be a leader and establish a leadership position has a right to and has an obligation to state their opinions. It's just you have to take into account the multiple stakeholders, and you're not just speaking for yourself, you're speaking on behalf of the company always.
Well, you mentioned that, you sort of know the issues. I mean, it is financial services. It's not like well, what accounting methodology we're going to go for. So how do you craft your message and create content that has a competitive edge in what is, generally speaking, not the most scintillating topic for most consumers? So how do you do that?
Well, I think people do care about money.
Oh, yes, indeed.
So, I think the way that we focus on our content development is to think about the value of that content to the person that we are targeting the content to, and then to think, what does that really mean? I mean, if you take, just for example, this morning, all I was trying to do was find whether my train was going to be on time or not. And I was searching on social media, and there was all this massive proliferation of content. But at the end of the day, I got to the station. I still didn't know whether there was any trains. And there was a sign up there that said, schedule has been revised. It didn't say when the train was. And the only thing I had to do in the end was just wait. And I think that's an example of, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there. But at the end of the day, the user is probably only looking for one thing. And if you can deliver that one thing, that's really valuable.
How do you find out what that one thing is?
Well, I'm going to take a step back and say it goes to the values or the principles by which, you know, the company is run. And in our case, we talk a lot about shared responsibility, mutual accountability. And I think that again, I go back to, we have a CEO who's very thoughtful on a lot of different issues, one of which is the fiscal crisis. And he's been very outspoken about what's going on in Washington and you know, the inability, it seems, on both sides of the aisle to be able to move the ball forward in a meaningful, substantive way. And he feels a responsibility as a Dow 30 CEO to engage in that dialogue. And I personally do think our leaders in the private sector and in corporate America should carry that responsibility. And the notion, too, of, you know, shared responsibilities of public and private partnerships is an important one. And I think that that's meaningful thought leadership. And it's not so much one issue, but rather what's the value that's part of your corporate culture that you're fostering as a leader.
And when you're creating sort of that value structure, who's buying in internally? Like, where is that coming from? You have a meeting with, who are the stakeholders internally that are helping craft what you want your value proposition to be?
Well, your value proposition has to be endemic to who you are. You can't turn yourself or your company into a pretzel and be something you're not. So that, I go back to authenticity. You know, our mantra is, you know, we do it right because things can go wrong. Things can go wrong in people's lives, like they can, you know, get hit by a hurricane, and we're there to kind of help them through that, and we do it ourselves. We don't, you know, make any bones about that. And we have a very, I think, passionate employee base that really wants to help people. And so it's there. It's not that you go through this whole exercise of crafting a value proposition. You know, your value proposition is sort of right in front of you. So how do you articulate it in a way that is really true to who you are, and you embrace it? So really, you want to make sure that everybody, not just your management committee or your senior management, but also, you know, everybody, your field organization in our case, you know, all the way down to people who are, you know, opening mail. Every level of the organization has to feel it. And if they can't identify with it, then you can't communicate about your brand. They are your brand ambassadors. And just to what Johan is saying, and Paul, they're out on social media, and even if they're tweeting or doing what they're doing in social media and saying that their views are their own, still, there's an association. So they have to be able to feel those values and be able to carry through on the brand promise that feels authentic and true to who the company is and who they are.
Johan, you mentioned that your CEO, Sergio, is going to be a LinkedIn influencer. So first of all, I'm wondering how that came about, and whether everyone in that the organization was happy about that decision.
So the last question, I don't know. I haven't asked. I think there's one thing that's important. It follows a little bit here also. I think you lead by example, or you don't lead at all. And that is very true for a CEO that wants a modern bank to be established. You can only live your values. And if integrity is a part of what you do, integrity doesn't stop at anybody's door. And so the modern banker, as you could sort of feel from Sergio and his interest in why does he want to be he's already an influencer on LinkedIn. Why does he want to do that? Well, because he knows this is the way the world is going. I mean, think back in the 60s and you would have had a CEO who says, well, I will never be on TV, I only want to be in print. We all look at that and go, why is that? And so why is that different for social? I think you have to live it. And that's the difference between being a manager and being a leader. Leaders take a very clear opinion about these things.
Let's say there's people sitting out there and they don't have leaders who are as comfortable going there. What is the case to be made to put them out there?
Two things. I don't know if he's comfortable, but I also don't know if anybody's comfortable being on an interview on TV, right? And so because social is probably more done in the four walls of your office or wherever you might be, and there's not an artificial setup with strong light in your face. It might feel a little bit more safe, and therefore, ergo, look at all the mistakes that are happening. I also think that it really doesn't occasionally have to be the CEO. If the CEO is not comfortable with it, if the CEO feels that it's somebody else, that's fine.
Right.
That doesn't really matter. I think it's important that you have a authentic approach to this, where you feel that you're not meeting the legal department, and compliance is not sort of checking every sentence. And so I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, and so let me ask you, Paul, you put out all this content, you get your thought leaders out there. What is success? How do you measure that?
It depends.
What a wishy-washy answer. Come on.
I think the critical thing that we always talk about internally is the fact that you don't start anything in the social area until you define what it is you're trying to do. So before you start a particular initiative, you have to know what success is. In the crisis, success was a very different measure than it might be for a social media initiative around a credit card launch, for example. So I think the main measure of success that we utilize on the brand side is what is the impact that our content and our initiatives have on the perception of Citi.
How do you measure that?
We measure it by asking people. In fact, LinkedIn has been very helpful with surveys within the LinkedIn audience. What is your perception if you haven't been touched by our content, and what is your perception if you have, and comparing the differences. And so that type of research is extremely valuable for us, and so that's how we do it.
So let's say that the perception is enhanced, but again, it's not leading to a sale of something. Is it successful or is it not successful then?
Well, I think perception and the likelihood of doing business with Citi and the likelihood of spending more money with Citi, they're all tied very closely together. So, it starts with perception, then it leads to purchasing.
Lisa, you've been doing this for a while. You started in social early on. What was the biggest mistake that you think that companies made then? I won't even ask you specifically, but what were the mistakes that were made that you really learned from today?
So I think financial services companies generally were late to social, so that was a mistake. Second is, social media sort of sits in this area where you've got marketing and communications, and it's kind of in the middle. And you have to have, if you're a financial services institution, you have to have your legal partners there.
Right.
And I think having a legal team involved with you who understands social, is educated on social, is a must. So having a digital expertise with your legal partner, and that's often a mistake where it's so new that you may have lawyers involved who are looking at the content because you're so regulated, and you have to be mindful of the regulatory landscape and your regulators, that you need to have legal partners who understand the importance of the two-way communication, of the interaction with the public and not will either prevent something from happening that is good for the brand, or over edit your content such that you lose your messaging and the whole point of engaging in a social channel.
So you're educating your legal and compliance department and sort of bringing them in and getting their buy-in, and that's leading to more successful outcomes?
Well, I think we're all in an ongoing education, but you have to have your legal team at your side. I mean, in our respective industries, you just have to have it because of the regulatory landscape. So, that's why we all look at the risks, and the legal team's part of it. So, they're not a foe; they're a friend in this. But we have a responsibility as marketers and communicators to help educate our legal partners, I think, on social media and what works by way of communications in those channels.
Johan, what about some mistakes that you've learned from that, you did it, help them so they don't make those mistakes? What are some of the mistakes that to be avoided in the social arena specifically?
Over-communicating is, I probably think, the one that comes to my mind. You don't really have to look at the financial industry, just look at celebrities. And you now know that there's probably, even if I were to be interested in some of that, less is occasionally more. And if less is more, nothing is everything. And, thinking about it that way. I think you have to have a good opinion. You need to make your point. Rather than being completely legaled up and it's an uninteresting comment, then rather not do it.
Right.
And I think that's what you have to look at, is occasionally the risk of saying something that is not that interesting is bigger than not doing anything at all.
Paul, is there an...
There's an interesting example where we've seen something that's gotten over-legaled spin out of control because of the consumer reaction. There have been, I don't remember the specific example and who the company was, but there was an insurance example where a claim wasn't paid and the consumer was...
It was a guitar in United Airlines. There was a little oil thing in the middle of the Gulf in United States that somebody told the CEO you shouldn't go on the interview.
Right. Right.
Right. So
but in a social channel, it's a response to a consumer was over legalized, and it spiraled out of control in social channels, and then became obviously a big story in more mainstream media.
Paul, I'm wondering, we talk about mistakes. Has there been like an upside surprise, like something about like some content that you were sort of like, well, I don't think this is going to work, but we'll give it a shot? Was there something like a pleasant surprise and that you didn't anticipate?
Well, I think probably the most surprising elements of, for us when it comes to content is people are really interested in the stories of how a bank can help people. And that sounds sort of counterintuitive to a lot of people's way of thinking, but banks actually do good things. And I think that has been surprisingly engaging to people, understanding whether it's in a community or whether it's a company or whether it's for an individual, the stories of how people have progressed through the help of a bank. I mean, I think that's really, it's been really enlightening for us because people are open to that and we didn't think they would be.
Have you learned something from these two-way dialogues that you didn't know about your own brand?
I think the biggest surprise is some of the branded content that becomes so good that people actually don't care about it being advertising anymore. I think you can occasionally see that that some brands have just been really, really good at nurture that out, and that just calls out again that really, really great ideas, they will connect. And that has never been different, right? A really great spot will be shared. We tend to forget in the digital age where you can put so much out there and just alpha and beta test everything that you still have to have aesthetics coming with it, and there still have to be really good work. So I think reminding yourself that quality work always will lead to more success.
Oh, an upbeat comment to end on. I like that. Are we gonna? I forgot whether we're doing questions or not. Where are my LinkedIn people? I forgot whether we're doing questions. No. A couple of questions. And I just came into right there, perfect. A couple of questions for this fantastic panel. Does anybody have one or two? No questions? Impossible. Here we go, question in the front. Hold on, here comes the microphone. Be like, run out like Phil Donahue or Sally Jesse Raphael.
I'm a huge advocate of positioning figureheads and thought leaders within the organization and helping build out their brands on social. And you've talked a lot about this. But when doing so, where do you draw the line between business and personal online? And is that even possible?
Yeah, I think every organization needs to tackle this and decide how they want to deal with it. And it's not going to be one size fits all. And you need to have a social, you need to have social media governance. So I would, suggest a social media council that, writes out a policy for the company that is a social media policy. And again, it'll be individualized to each company. It's a hard one because you can't prevent individuals from, using social media on their personal time. Marketers use it on company time. And so, but they always need to be mindful that however they're presenting themselves will be perceived, as Johan said, potentially attached to the company, even if it's in an individual capacity. So I think you've got to be diligent about having that policy, and as an organization deciding how you want to navigate that. And it's going to be different by organization. At least that's what I've found.
I would probably say there's more than just one exclamation mark. Everything is business. And that is as much of if stuff goes right, but also if stuff goes wrong. If you have a CEO or some leader of your organization that will make it into the headlines if they do something wrong, likelihood is they won't make it in there if they wouldn't be that leader of the organization. And so I think everything is business. That doesn't mean that I can't profile myself as also having personal interests and having an opinion about, playing golf, playing tennis, gardening, painting, whatever you want to do. But expect everything to be business.
I have just a follow-up on that. I mean, you all have businesses with financial advisors or insurance salespeople, and how personal do you want these folks to be on social? I know you have policies, but I was just, a friend of mine sent me a Facebook page of somebody we know who's in the business who took a very public stand about a pretty intense social issue. And I thought, how do you manage that? If you've got this organization with thousands of advisors, how do you deal with that?
In our case, our agents are independent, not captive, right? Mm-hmm. So they are not our employees, they're independent agents. And so for us, it's all about making sure, A, that they have the digital tools to market and do their jobs with the customers, and be it consumer and businesses that they're going after. We're one of several product suites they can sell. So we want to stay in their mind as a better brand to do business with, and also for the end consumer. So it's the kind of thing where we also have to deal with our intermediaries, make sure they have those tools, but also we give them that content. Mm-hmm. And so if we help them to get set up with digital marketing ideas and Facebook pages, we also want to give them the content that's going to help sell the product.
Do you train them?
Yeah, we do, actually. Mm-hmm. I mean, we train them in that we give them a toolkit and what have you, yeah.
And what about you, Paul? I mean, Citi's a little bit different now that you don't have the Smith Barney brand, so you don't have this bunch of brokers, but you have a lot of people who deal with the public. How do you manage that process?
Well, it's not easy. I think it comes down to a lot of what Lisa was saying. It's really about you've got to hire the right people. You've got to train them. You have to give them the right tools to do what they do, and you have to have the right controls around it. But it's not easy because you are dealing with human beings, and it's no different from email. I mean, we don't talk about the risks of email much anymore, but it's the same in a way that you train somebody and you give them an email account, they can email whoever they want about whatever they want. So it's the same risk, it's just a little more controlled, but it's basically the same issue.
Okay, other questions before, one more question is okay? One more.
A question for the two CMOs. How are you managing your budgets? So we talk a lot about the value and low cost of digital, but high impact. But are you shifting how you're factoring digital into your overall marketing mix and investments?
Absolutely. It depends on, again, what are the upfront metrics to particular campaign, who's the target, what's the product, but always having those metrics up front. I've found just that it's very clear that digital is a cheaper channel. You can, the real-time insights, we didn't even get to that, through social listening that you can get in a reaction to a campaign or conversations about your brand, and then just inserting yourself into those conversations through the real-time listening and insights is very meaningful, and you can adjust your messaging. Similarly with a paid campaign in digital channels, you watching it and you can adjust quickly as against the good old days of television production, where if it's not hitting, you got to pull it down and you've got to reshoot and reproduce something all over again. So it's a very nimble channel that is a beautiful thing for marketers, I think.
Flawlessly. You ask, how do we manage our budgets? I say flawlessly.
Flawlessly, of course, flawlessly.
I have nothing else to, I think you said it all wonderful.
What she said.
Yeah.
Okay,
perfect.
very good.
Well, it's a question of how does anybody talk about analog anymore? I mean, of course digital plays a key role. I don't, with all the respect, obviously, I don't think it is as cheap as it being communicated. I think there's a lot more trial and error. I think there's a lot more operational cost, headcount, maybe in agencies. I think there's also maybe a bigger cost of risk. But nevertheless, it's pretty obvious. The marketeers are good at looking at the audience and their behaviors, and then they match that in how they approach it. 70% of the world's population is doing something on social media and digital. I mean, that should be explanatory enough you should probably not have 70% of your budgets going against digital, but single digits are the numbers of the past. I actually think, particularly in the financial industry and technology in general, I think banks are coming more into technology. I think we probably need to overcompensate in order to catch up.
There you go.
Okay, I want to thank our incredible panel. We could have gone on longer. I'm sorry to cut into your break, but thanks very much for all of you. And just last comment, I guess one of my memes from this panel was "Big Hat, No Cattle."
Yeah.
Which turns out to be the title of a Randy Newman song, and also something George Bush used to say. So it was an interesting catch up with Hillary. And also that businesses are made up of people, and especially in financial services where the faceless name might appear in front of you, balancing between the individuals and the brand and the corporate view and the personal view, I think is where the magic is, if you get it right. So we'll be back here at 3 o'clock and with a follow-on with our CEO panel, and I hope you'll all come back to join. Thanks.